Action ready to go. Another exciting podcast week. It's the first week of December. We've got 3 more days left of annual enrollment period on the Medicare side of things, and things feel busy. I was just talking with Mosiah, our content producer, about how there's never a slow season anymore, that a few years ago, this time of year would be pretty dead, but the size and scale and the chaos of the industry, it always feels busy.
Yeah, and of course, for the fair weather agents, their last day is tomorrow because it's Friday. You know what I mean? The fair weather agents, they're packing it in tomorrow. The agents that are in it to win it, yep, they're struggling all the way through, and it's weird. It ends on a Sunday this year, which is a weird dynamic because there's a lot of states where, I mean, there's telemarketing laws, right? You can't make outbound calls or on a Sunday, so some weird dynamics that we're kind of looking at for wrapping up this AEP.
Yeah, so for all intents and purposes, if you're not a hardcore agent that works Saturday and maybe even Sunday, AEP is going to come to a little bit of a whimper instead of out with the bang. Usually the 7th is one of the busiest or most productive days as everybody tries to get those apps in. But, you know, I think that's just kind of leveled out over the past couple of years as well, where there's going to be some SEPs, especially this year, in that overtime period that we call it, where you're going to have still the ability to submit some applications during December, and then we roll right into open enrollment.
I think it's going to be more divided than ever. Like everything, we always just talk about like thirds or 80-20 or whatever, but you have all these agents that I think there's just so many out there. And look, some of you are listening to this and you're like, oh my gosh, this enrollment period was just the worst ever. This AEP, it just kicked my butt. It was abusive. It was hard. It was terrible. There's plenty of agents who are just happy to pack it in, just be done with it. And then there's just that fewer percentage of agents who are just going to be like, well, time for me to keep on keeping on. And I'm going to work during this overtime period and, you know, throughout the holidays, and I'm going to go get mine. I think those agents are going to do very well. There's fewer of them, but they're going to do very well.
Yeah, the positive is, you know, for us, we're up very, very substantially as far as enrollments this year. You know, like we talked about, proving out the growth that we've had this year. And that trend held out from literally the first 3 days of AEP all the way through AEP. And in fact, I think we probably will end increasing that year-over-year margin instead of it kind of trending down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's been great. There's definitely some bright spots there with new enrollments amidst a lot of the negative swirlings that we have in the background. And this is kind of an add-on to, or maybe like a part 2 of what we talked about with the Medicare Wasteland, because when we put out that episode, I had one of the agents that's, you know, pretty active on social media was like, your last podcast was very brutal for me to listen to. And I was like, well, sometimes it feels brutal to say some of the things, but, you know, we ultimately talk about some of the challenges to...
You'll have to tell me afterwards which agent it was, because I had 4 agents reach out to me too, and they're like, oh, tell me more about this, tell me more about that. I'm like, and they never reach out to me, but the last podcast, yeah, they did have a lot of lingering questions, and I'm like, well, I only gave you 10% of the information, so. You know,
yeah, and I feel, you know, hopefully our carrier partners, I know they trust us because we have some back pocket information that's very...
just wait till you see my river card.
Yeah, we know that we just can't talk about, or it's just not in good faith to talk about in the market of things and changes that another shoe to drop for some of these carriers that I think are really going to shock the industry, and they're going to have some trickle down effects. And so I think even though we've been talking about this for the past 2 years, things are going to get a little bit worse, a little bit more difficult before they get better.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the Wasteland and some of the things that I think we can just talk about. For once, we're going to talk about some of these like negative things that are kind of going on that still continue to go on, and you know, and then there's actually going to be a lot of positivity in this episode, which we're keeping it light and positive.
There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Trying to be encouraging. You know, but yes, there's still it's really painful and we're already doing, like, for example, next week, I already have with our agency owners a meeting on the books on the 8th of December, the very day after, where we're going through the pros and the cons, like the good, the bad, the ugly of AEP, what did you observe in your local market, talking about like the pain points and the challenges, how you overcame them. We're going through the outlook for OEP and this next year and just kind of the overall state of the industry. So we're kind of having like a whole debrief. We like to do that quick on the 8th. We like to give our agent and agency partners plenty of time to be strategizing and working for next year. I don't want to say the word hate. It's not as useful with the carriers when you do these AEP debriefs in February and March when, OEP is already over and you're already forecasting out at the end of the year by the time you're doing an AEP debrief. It's not very helpful. So we're already on to that this next week. And like everything, I'm just the type of person where if there's any bad news, I'm like, dude, just give me it all. Just don't sugarcoat it. Give me all the bad news. Give me all the bad medicine. I don't need any sugar to go down with it. Just give me the bad news. And I think that's what we do want to give you some of the, I think, bad news, just to kind of tack on to last week's Wasteland episode. I think I just want to prepare the market that I think there's multiple carriers, plans, geographical areas, plan types. There's other pain that's, I think, in the short horizon that's going to be coming to the marketplace everywhere. I think we're going to see, unfortunately, I think that we're going to see some more plan suppressions, some more non-commission plans. I don't think that we're going to make it out of OEP without seeing more of that stuff popping off. And that's probably about as much as I feel comfortable saying right now. But I think there's more to come.
Yeah, we very specifically had calls almost every day this week with bad news or challenging news. And, without leaking sources or not being good partners with some of our relationships, these things will trickle down throughout the marketplace and play out probably after Medicare AEP ends and before open enrollment begins. And I don't think that some of these news and headlines and carriers are going to go loud. They're going to be like whisper changes to the effect where they don't go loud and announce these things they're not going to say it with their chest, basically.
Yeah. And when we have the opportunity and we feel comfortable and in a place where we can share more information, we're definitely going to do that. I just don't think that it's probably a little too soon to be very specific, but I think there's just some more, there's more unfortunate news coming on the horizon. So with that being said, I think that we're really in this game still where all of the carriers are really trying to adjust and manipulate to every umpteenth degree where they can and where they want business and how they want business. And, hey, we really want business in this state, and not only this state, but in this particular county where we have, these good economics with these particular providers. We want that business, but not that. Oh, we really like this plan type, but not that plan type. Carriers are getting so nitpicky and granular to the type of business that they want, where you just have to remember, and I tell carriers this, and I'm telling you all as distribution who listen, an app is not an app. Like, it's just all apps are not created equal. There are certain specific markets where carriers really have a desire to grow business still, and a lot of areas where they're like, we're just trying to make it work, And I think you're going to have to start to see some of the marketplace scenarios playing out this next year where a lot of the focus and emphasis, financial incentives, everything is going to be tied around where and how someone is driving and generating business versus just, hey, write X amount of volume or apps for us. So
I'd had that post on LinkedIn about the kind of the synopsis of the Medicare Wasteland, and one of the local regional carriers talked about working together and understanding cohorts of segments of the Medicare population that the carriers want, because those are the sustainable, profitable people. And I said, yeah, that's great. And distribution's trying to work and arrange with those things, but Medicare serves tens of millions of people across the country, not these small fractional micro segments in metro areas. That's great that you want to go after those targeted micro segments, but what are we doing for all the other tens of millions of Medicare beneficiaries out in the marketplace?
Yep. So I think that's a perspective that people need to be aware of as we continue to evolve and adapt moving forward. But then the other thing with that, if you're a carrier as well, and you're trying to be a little bit more surgical and tactful with how you're growing, with your strategy, I still am not going to rule it out. And I'm not saying that this is happening yet, but my crystal ball is starting to form this picture where I remember back in the day with Molina, very specifically, they gave you like 100 appointment slots, and they're like, here you go. You get your 100 individuals that you can appoint to sell our product. That's it. You're capped off. So if you wanted to add any more agents to your distribution, you had to, remove a couple from your roster, right? And so, look, I would not be surprised if carriers in the future cap distribution or say, hey, we're going to black out, or we are going to not take any more agent appointments. I absolutely think that that's going to come into play this next year, where one way to very much mitigate or limit how much business you're going to get is by limiting your number of distribution that you have. I can see that playing out this next year.
I think you're being nice in saying you can see, because we know that's happening or going to happen, right? And let's talk about the reasons why. I mean, the carriers, what a lot of agents don't understand is you don't have the right to sell these carriers just because you want to.
There's no entitlement to, right?
These carriers, most of them absorb costs and fees. And a lot of agents, we all know, we're very familiar with the 80-20 rule, where 20% of the agents write 80% of the business and the other 80% doesn't really do anything. Well, every time these carriers appoint you with a state, a lot of them absorb those costs, and they have fees there, and they may have technological licensing fees.
Well, let's dive a second deeper and talk about that. Yeah. So, for example, I will tell you, United Healthcare and Anthem, very specifically, when you go to appoint and onboard in multiple states, you have to pay your non-resident appointment fees. So it's kind of a rub and a friction point for a lot of agents, right? Because if you're going to go appoint with Anthem and you're like, hey, I got 22 state licenses, then you have to go check out when you're trying to appoint and bust out the credit card, and it's a big amount. It's a huge, hefty fee to go get appointed, because some states it's $15 and some it's $200 to pay an appointment fee in order to appoint to sell in that state. So Anthem, United Healthcare, they pass those fees on to the agent or the producer. And if you're like in an employment arrangement, you're in a call center, something like that, then your employer is likely paying and shouldering all those costs. Mm-hmm. Carriers like Humana, WellCare, Aetna, Cigna, you name it, these others, they kind of absorb those costs and they don't pass them on to the agent or the agency.
Correct. But in the funding environment where we're at, and the urgency to get to profitability, they are cutting every dollar that they possibly can, and unnecessary appointment fees is going to be something that they're cutting.
Yeah, and it's a twofold effect. It's number one, it's a reduction in your OpEx, right, and your operating expense, number one. But number two, like, for example, I can also tell you from the data point too, that if I have an agent who does Medicare, that most of their revenue comes from selling Medicare products, and they're writing more than 200 plans per year, the chances are that they're actually a really proficient agent. They can tell me exactly what IRMA means. They can tell me what the brackets and the amounts are. They can quote off the top of the head the Medicare Part B premium. If I have an agent who does P&C and stumbles upon a Medicare app once every 2 months, they're not very proficient and they're not very good anyway. So you're going to have a more poor quality of business typically with those agents too, when they're very sporadic. So your quality of business is lower in some cases, and and also your operational expenses to accommodate that agent are lower. So you're going to have some OpEx mitigation there with some expenses, and then you're also going to have carriers trying to find ways to modify their agent roster to ensure the best possible business that they're receiving, whether it's from a quality perspective, if it's an agent type, and also when it comes to compliance, right? Like if you're an agent who is popping off on, the whole smoke is fire, and you're constantly kind of in the hot seat and you're always on the tilt or in that gray area, these carriers are just going to find a very good reason to just be like, hey, you know what? We already are in a landscape where the volume of business in which we're receiving is already a challenge. Like, we don't need to continue perpetuating this type of business.
Yeah, with those OpEx costs you talked about, something that's hidden that keeps coming up a lot from the carriers is there are SaaS seats, there are license costs, right? So if you're a health insurance company and you're managing these insurance licenses and you've got tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of licenses, a lot of times these big carriers are paying for seats in either an SAP or a Salesforce environment. Basically, you're taking up a slot for them to manage you. So they have a cost. And we go through this exercise all the time with our tech stacks. And before you know it, you can be wasting tens or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in unnecessarily used fees. And the carriers are all going through that exercise too, again, trying to cut costs. And so there's just not...
And the hierarchy realignment where you go, I've got the same NPN that's realigned to 6 different organizations in 2 years.
Yep.
And they're still not producing revenue for us.
Correct. And you have their contracting teams, their operating teams, their broker management teams. And a lot of these agents the juice isn't worth the squeeze, right? The cost, and as Dan has stated, and we've been talking about repeatedly on the podcast, these carriers don't want to grow a lot of it. And the ones that did want to grow have probably achieved their metrics during this annual enrollment, and they don't want any more. There ain't no more beds, no more vacancy, right?
Yep. Well, and then I already know, as we're looking forward into the year, look, I know of like 2 carriers that I've been like sweating bullets over because of a lot of the business that they're writing. I'm not talking nationals. There's some smaller local and regional ones that I just think that sometimes the learning curve, they don't know what a bad position they're in yet. They don't realize the bad position that they're sitting in. And I think it's going to hit at some point where somebody in their company is going to go, oh shit, wait a minute. This doesn't look very good. And it's just too late. And I think that we're going to continue to see a couple of these smaller carriers kind of become insolvent or know that they're going to be in a problem this next year.
Bit off more than they could chew, as our dad would say.
Absolutely. And then it does have this trickle-down effect again, where then they either come out of the market completely, they stop taking enrollments, they become non-commissionable, and then immediately all that business is going to go shift to another big national. And then the big national who did have a more sophisticated, bid or, forecast, they thought they were positioned right. And then suddenly they're getting all this extra business that was not, on their bingo card. And suddenly they're getting that. And again, they have to now react or respond to it with something that's non-commissionable or suppressed. And so it's just I think there's just this whole chain reaction that's going to continue on throughout this whole next year. And so, again, I'm just saying one way, if I'm them, and I always have to think about this and put myself in their position. What moves, what levers do you pull? What do you do to control it? I think that there's going to be, again, a good way that you always mitigate and control your sales volume is you have to control your sales distribution. So you go and you start looking at all of your business and saying, hey, where am I getting business from and from whom? And how can I mitigate that? And some of it's from the starting point of, can I limit my appointments and can I, kind of buffer and ramp some of the movement of onboarding of agents from the get-go? And then secondarily, from a sales process, can I find ways to mitigate receiving sales once they're eligible to sell? And then, compliance is an easy one for carriers right now to hang their hat on. I think there's a lot of bad actors in the industry right now, and there's been a lot of action to get rid of those bad actors, which I think is good. I think there's some carriers that are going to go take it 3 steps further than they should because they want to find justification to hang their hat on to go and mow down and mitigate their distribution to the right size number that they want.
Yep. Because look, guys, these insurance carriers, once they have a filed plan, they're locked in for the year, right? They can't go to CMS and say, all right, we hit our growth goals in these areas. We're shutting this down, right? They can't just turn it off like that. They're locked in. And so in some of these areas and carriers where they've already taken in the growth and they've been some of the outliers, the only mechanisms that they have to slow down future enrollment is to do these things that we're talking about. And we're going to see them continue to aggressively go after anybody they can with compliance. They're probably not going to appoint new people in the days of you being able to just willy-nilly go appoint and get licensed to sell with everybody in every state are probably going to slow down temporarily.
So here's a good example. Like I can't, like back in the day, 5 years ago, I could maybe say, hey, I'm going to go work with an investor. I got an investor who's going to kick in $5 million. They're going to fund this startup. Look, I have these dudes that I know. They're going to start this call center. These people have done solar and door-to-door and X and Y and Z, and I'm going to spin up this distribution, and I'm going to go sell, 10,000 apps a year for you. I need these. Back 5 years ago, carriers like, great, let's go, foot on the gas.
5 months ago.
Yeah, and now these days it's just not like that. They might go, that's a cool story, bro, but we actually don't want you to go do that and spin up and go write 10,000 apps like wherever. We're not trying to go buy that business and go grow that business right now.
Yeah, and so we are going to see unprecedented for the last 10 years of actions to basically mitigate widespread agents' abilities to sell, probably some cancellation and termination of contracts in some way, shape, or form, probably continued aggressive compliance. And look, the reality is, guys, if you're one of these carriers and you go, well, we need to slow some of this down and we need to cut, who are we going to cut? Let's cut the people who are non-compliant, who don't sell a lot, who the juice isn't worth the squeeze, who they only sell a handful of apps. And what they're doing is they're just raising the bar of the standards for agents and agencies.
There's going to be they're going to break some eggs making that omelet this next year.
And these are happening. They're not, you'll start seeing these things play out over the next 60 days, but those are mechanisms to action that are happening.
Yep. So we always say, look, and I try to paint this in a perfect scenario, because we always talk about it like behind the scenes, like when we have leadership meetings, when we're talking to staff or agents or agency partners, we're talking about like, what's the best case scenario, like an ideal scenario? What would be perfect? And we strive to be perfect, right? We want to get as close to that as we possibly can. In an ideal scenario for a carrier, they would love it if an agent was like a very true business professional, had multiple years of experience, was very polished, well-versed, would be able to go and drive and meet the consumer face-to-face, shake hands, be as like a field agent, build rapport as a local agent, go through an hour-and-a-half long presentation, answer every single question, do a great enrollment, and of course, check every single box. Of course, they read the statement of understanding at the kitchen table. Of course, they talked about next steps. They talked about the plan's star rating. They told them the TPMO disclaimer.
Went over step therapy,
they
medications.
Went through everything. Yes, like in a perfect scenario. And then after that, they even said, you're going to get phone calls to do your house calls, to go through and do that. And, in a perfect scenario, and that would be the perfect consumer, and they would even set them up for 90-day mail order with their preferred thing, and maybe even put them to their favorite value-based provider, there in town. Perfect scenario. The reality is that doesn't happen most of the time, but the more that a carrier can kind of change things to move those guardrails or parameters to go closer to that perfect scenario, they're going to try to do that.
Yeah, and really, guys, I talk about raising the bar, raising the standard, and that's what they're doing, right? It's going to clean up a lot of what's evolved and the messy, sloppy sales practices and the untrained agents and the rapid disenrolls, and we're going to get back to a higher standard enrollment. We're going to get back to better, healthier LTVs where people aren't wanting to change their plans all the time, but we're still through a little bit more pain.
And you brought up something that's important, and I always like to, where I can, dive in and be specific. So like next year, let's just say you're an agent and, OEPNs and it's April or May, and you're like out in the marketplace talking to people, and you see like you're at a health fair, whatever it may be, you're doing your own lead generation, self-gen, and you come across some apps and you write 15 apps that month under ACC SEP. Guess what? You're going to be termed in the next 60 days. Like I can just tell you, next year when you're finding those people and you're marking ACC and you submit those applications, that's cool. you got it through the carrier and they processed your app and you got paid your commissions, but within like 60 days, you're just going to get terminated and you're not going to be in the industry.
Yeah. There's a lot of things that I think we could get specific on, but the point is this. It's going to be more of the industry, like we've been saying repeatedly for 2 years. You've got to become a better agent. You've got to have better practices. You've got to be better trained, and you have to add value to the marketplace, or you're just going to be, frankly, eliminated out of the industry. And so it's very important that you continue to increase your skill sets, you do things a good way, and you add value to the marketplace, or you're going to get washed out.
Yep.
Let's talk about some bright spots of what we see. And
so that's all our negative, right?
No, I mean, there's a lot more we could talk about, but we can't get into anything specific. But we think that 2026, guys, is still going to look rough overall for the Medicare and Advantage and supplement market. And it's going to be strong survive and the strong thrive. And I do think there are some good signals on the horizon.
We talked about it at lunch today. We're up pretty much 200% from last year. And we sit here and we've had a whole year of the podcast. I practically want to wallow in misery all the time. We talk about how negative I get on the podcast. I'm like, man, I hate just saying like negative things. It's bad. And we said like, look, we're up 200% and it's because we're having to climb the ladders on top of the bodies of all the dead people.
That's what I said. Yeah. It reminded me of, the Terminator just making it to the over the pile of rubble,
the pile of dead bodies. So it's like, look, as all this crap is happening in the industry and everyone's tapping out, and some people's business models are getting exposed, and they're not surviving or navigating the landscape very well. We just kind of like keep crawling on top of the pile of dead bodies, and I think we're going to keep doing that. So I think from an illustration perspective, you as like the agent need to continue to do the same thing. And we're talking about like surviving or adapting, or if you're able to, change and modify these business practices. For those that are able to do it, it's still a very good, viable opportunity, and they're going to continue to thrive. But there is just going to be this natural selection process over the next year that's going to continue.
Yeah, and ultimately, we talked about it on the last episode. There are going to be less agents, less agencies, less FMOs, less orgs that are big and large and viable, and they're going to be healthier with higher standards, and they're going to have more of the market share, right? Those other people and their bad practices are just going to be systematically eliminated out of this. So you've just got to make sure that you're on the right side of that. A couple of the positive indicators, because the CMS put out their 2027 proposed. Before we get into that, do you want to talk about the United?
Yeah, let's talk about the United first.
Yeah. One last thing, because this has been a bright spot that maybe got some dimmed out a little bit, but the Idaho State Insurance Commissioner famously put out a bulletin and a cease and desist to United Healthcare for unfair business practices. And last week it broke that United is suing the Idaho State DOI and Commissioner. And basically they're saying their countersuit is saying we gave notice in July that we were going to pay somewhere between 0 and full FMV on these plans.
Which no commission is 0.
Yeah. Therefore, giving us the ability and permission to have moved these plans to 0. And, hey, at least we stayed and kept these plans in the marketplace when everybody else exited. And so we stayed there. And then the final thing of what they'd sued back on was basically saying, you don't have the proper regulatory authority to say we can't do that because CMS. We're federally regulated by CMS, and you can only from a state level basically arbitrate things of insolvency or
state licensure and appointment.
Yeah, state licensure and appointment, and basically you're out of your
jurisdiction.
You're out of your jurisdiction. And so that was United's response. And so as we knew, and as we talked about, we didn't think that United was going to immediately go, oh, darn it, you got us, here you go, here's all the commissions. Because, and like we've said, be careful what you wish for. If they do, and everybody writes those plans that they're on the tilt of not being profitable anyway, what are they going to do? They're just going to exit like everybody else had done.
Yeah, and so I'm not poo-pooing the people online that you're seeing on like forums and LinkedIn and these other groups that are saying like, yeah, we're fighting against, fighting for agent rights, and we got this big win, and we got all these agent DOIs on here now, and we're going to get you your agent commissions. I've never been, you won't see me doing that. And that's not because I'm bought and paid for by the carriers. Yeah, we are, they're the supplier. We do work for them as an FMO. And, like everything, they have ebbs and flows. There's good years, there's bad years. You have longevity and relationships with these carriers. And look, we're going to get through it, and we're going to get to the other side of it, and we're going to get to better days. It's just a tough time with some readjustments. But, for me to kind of want to champion something that I think is going to ultimately have a far worse effect, I think it totally sucks. There's some agents that are really struggling and going through it, and agencies with the commissions in some of these areas. But like I said, paying them a commission right now in some of these areas is going to be very short-lived, and the effect of that is going to be far worse than where we're at even now.
Yes, but the attention is great, right? The DOIs coming on board and saying, hey, this is a problem. The carriers, United in this case, suing back and saying, well, hey, here's our perspective, here's our position on this. And all of the attention and the advocacy from, these agents that put a lot of hard work into it, and NABIB and HOFA and all these people.
And they care deeply and passionately, right?
And they're all doing a good job advocating, and it ultimately brings attention to the issue, right? Because as we've talked about, CMS is in triage mode, where they're literally going, here's 1,000 things that are on fire that need to be solved. What are the hottest burning things that we need to solve right now? And the more attention and media and loud noise and clamor that it gets, then it can get fixed earlier, right? And that's unfortunately the way most problems are, and that's the way that our government is currently. And there are, as we know in healthcare, a lot of challenges that are being worked on to be solved. And so I think it's good that there's a lot of attention and an increasing clamor online and, over this issue, because it's going to bring it to a head. And again, I think it's ultimately good. And, I think as we transition that and use that as CMS has indicated that they are listening. And I think we talked 2 weeks ago and said, hey, we were kind of a little bit disappointed. We thought CMS probably would have stepped in a little bit earlier and cleaned up some of this regulatory stuff and this bureaucracy that's really slowed down the Medicare industry. And no sooner that they put out the proposed final rule for 2027. And it's important to note that these things are just proposed, right? They're not.
But also, I think, and somebody would have to correct me, I can't remember if we're going back and forth and having commenters or not, like we used to, because
they're asking, that was the big thing, is they're asking for comments on a lot of stuff.
And myself and about 5 or 6 other very well-known people in our industry have posted on LinkedIn and others saying the problem with that is, like, me as a commenter, my hands are in the dirt. I really know I am a subject matter expert. And when I go to be a commenter to CMS and really give them my feedback and opinion for the past 5 years, it's like, okay, that's cool, but piss off. We already decided this 3 months ago. It's like they were absolutely tone deaf to any sort of actual feedback. And so it's kind of
that's how most government and city things are when they ask for public comment. You're like, oh, so your opinion's 99.9% already made up of what you're going to do.
Unless it goes to ballot, you know what I mean? Yeah. And they really do know what they're already going to do. And so I would say in the last 5 years, when they say that, like, here's something proposed and we're open to comment, in very high likelihood, it's just going to go through as proposed. Maybe they'll listen. Maybe they'll take some feedback. But most of it, I think the proposed, like, look, this is the first time in years, though, you read through the call letter and there's actually bright spots and things that I think are positive, right? A lot of these proposed changes we'll talk about here in a minute, I think are actually really good. I think they're long overdue. And I think a lot of you agents and agency owners out there are going to feel a little bit of reprieve, a little bit, with some of these things that they're proposing, I think.
Yeah, I think that for us, it feels like, as long as we've been doing this podcast, sometimes it feels like you're screaming into the void and hoping that this nameless, faceless government entity hears you and here's your pleas. And that's why I'm saying I think this is a positive, because it does seem like something that the industry's complained about. They're like, hey, we hear you and we're addressing some of these things. And so that's a positive indicator. Again, none of this would change for the 2026 plan year. That ship's already sailed.
That's important to understand too.
You know, and so even if this passes as not proposed but goes into effect, these changes will not take effect until 2027 plan year. And so as we kind of go through, there were the obvious ones were changes and asking for comments about TPMOs, right? And the cool thing was they're asking for comments about, okay, who is a TPMO? Because famously over the last the prior administration's call letters, they were lumping everybody in as a TPMO. Agents, agencies, lead vendors, everybody was in that same bucket, and we were going, timeout. That does not apply to us. That's not who we are. That's not what we do. So they are seeking to understand the delineation of TPMOs and brokers and consumers and how that whole thing works.
And not only like the size and the scope of a TPMO too, and like ones that are large and scaled versus like smaller. So like the segmentation of the size and scope of the TPMOs too.
Yeah,
which I think is good.
Yep, and as it is currently with everybody being described as a TPMO, they're already saying they're going to change or eliminate or soften some of the things that have really been pain points for agents and agencies, specifically anybody that transacts any sort of business over the phone. They talked about the disclaimer timing of when you need to say that very cumbersome TPMO. They believe that it is cumbersome, it is distracting, it doesn't necessarily fit forced into the first minute of the call.
Hey, Mike, sorry to cut you off, but I really need to say this really quickly. I do not represent every plan in your area.
Yeah, it's like if you've ever done that and you have a client go, why are you telling me this? I don't feel comfortable. That's weird. You're like, oh no, I'm following the rules. You have to sell the fact that you're actually trying to protect them. So they've talked about that. I think that disclaimer will be nuked down to what the mouthful that you have to say, and it will
I have always said, and if anybody from CMS listens, if you think that it's important for an agent to disclose or disclaim like what or how many plans you represent or something, that you already go through all these disclosures in the statement of understanding. Mm-hmm. Like you're already doing it, and at the wrap up of a phone call or technically an appointment, you're supposed to go through the statement of understanding. And if it's important and you want to keep it, that's the place to insert it. I've already said that for...
We know that specific one about how many you represent is stupid, because a lot of times agents want to represent a plan and you can't anyway for very particular reasons. So it's just...
They're part of a hospital system. They're captive. They don't appoint independent agents.
It doesn't do the intended thing. And I think as we go through and delineate some of these things, that's the theme, is CMS is legitimately questioning the wisdom of why we do certain things. And that's the bright spot, right? Is they're open to saying, hey, that does not make sense. That's just over-regulatory. That's not unnecessary bureaucracy. Let's think about why we're doing these things. Good. So the disclaimer, they talked about removing the SHIP component, which obviously the prior administration was very hot on SHIP. The current administration,
and then we had the damning study of the SHIP results, and I was just like, let me quote you this resource.
Yeah, so they're like, well, you don't have to say that anymore. That seems prudent to not have to say that. The recording retention period, this is silly, but to drop it from 10 years down to 6. And then they also asked for comments and basically said it's very unlikely that you get asked for a call or a complaint after a year.
After 2 years is...
But let's 6 years, and then they talked about some of the data resources needed, and then as AI goes through and transcripts everything, they asked for comments. So they're basically continuing to question.
I think the only thing going from a 10-year to a 6 is like data storage. The only thing that we're going to benefit from that is if you're really storing massive amounts of files and like you're on some consumption basis model, you're going to save a little bit. But other than that, like 6 years, 10 years, it's all to the point. Like anything after 2 or 3 is, I just don't know what you'd use it for anyway.
Yeah. So that was a big component, was the TPMOs, the disclaimers, changes, a couple of other things, more changes to marketing and appointments. But the first is, you'll be able to market following educational events.
It used to be that way.
Yes.
And they changed it. So
and again, it's to supposedly protect people, giving them a 12-hour thing so they don't feel pressured. But you're questioning the wisdom. And anybody that's actually done this in practice knows how stupid that is. And educate somebody and then they want immediate help. I've done this hundreds of times, thousands of times at a senior center where you do an educational event. You have people there on premise that want you to present them a plan right there. And you're like, hold on a minute. Can you come back in your wheelchair tomorrow? And let me drive 3 hours because I don't want you to feel pressured to sign up here right now. And they're like, that's the stupidest thing.
They're like, it was a big pain for me to make the effort to get
yeah.
here. And
you're like, sorry, the handicap shuttle that picks me up to take me to the community center only comes picks me up twice a week. And it was an act of God to get me here in the first place. So, again, just something that doesn't make any sense. They're looking at eliminating that.
So I would say thank you if anybody's listening to CMS. I think that's wise. I think that's smart to eliminate that.
Yeah, and I did a call with with another group earlier this year, and we talked about it. And one of the things that I think is good about overall these changes is you're going to see an easing of some of the field marketing practices for traditional field agents that were prevalent back in the day. Because one of the reasons why the industry has evolved into so much telesales and so much recorded calls is because they've clamped down so freaking hard. We've talked about it before on the podcast on a lot of the consumer face-to-face marketing things and a lot of the things that traditional field agents did. You have those marketing and compliance regulations paired with the changing of evolution and technology during COVID and the way people were able to do business. And a lot of those legacy practices that were good, that were connecting, seminars and dinners and things like that, and were good marketing ways that we built our entire books of business back in the day, pretty much became non-existent because they became so rigorous compliance-wise and that they just didn't make any sense or they weren't any ROI. And so I think that there's a good indicator of that kind of business practices becoming healthier again and becoming more viable. As we've been saying, that's a need
But look, the carriers want some of that. They want the personal, look, they're paying for a service like right from an agent as a vendor, and they want more of that. There's a lot of value in that for them.
Look, Dan and I live and breathe it, and we talk this all the time, and we'll sometimes, this AEP was a nice time to reflect of, we had some of these clients reaching out to Brian, who manages our old book of business, who have literally been our clients for 15, 16 years, that we bought them a steak at Maddox and did a community meeting 15 years ago, met them in their home, and they've been a good, loyal consumer and client for 15 plus years. And that's the way Medicare Advantage and Medicare was designed to be sold, and that good quality of business to begin with. And changing some of these things to allow for those things, I think, is really, really good indicators for the business.
Yeah, and before you continue, because I know there's some other stuff you want to talk about with the call letter specifically, I'm going to continue saying this over and over and over, and I don't even care if you all get sick of hearing it. The one thing that's always stood out to me and bothered me is the fact that, and you have almost you'll see it online. You'll almost have a pool of agents who are and consumers, pro Medicare supplements and PDPs, they're the best, and Medicare disadvantages of the devil and blah, blah, blah. They're very divisive. And then you have the pro MA agents and the pro, and it's so divided. And very few people are in the middle being very pragmatic about it and saying well, hey, not everybody can afford a supplement. And some people, are duals and there's specialty products for these people. I also have, clients who need, there's a use case for all these products, and that's why they exist. And we need more pragmatic people. And the same kind of example that I'm using, I've noticed all these years in the business, is that online and in the agent community, from the field type agents, they've been throwing rocks, at the glass houses for the last couple of years about the phone agents, and it's all the bad phone agents. And look, certainly there have been, I know of some really bad agencies and entities who from leadership down had bad practices, did very bad, created bad businesses, did things as bad actors in the industry. And trust me, there's plenty of bad call center agents. But what I am telling you is there are a lot of really good phone agents who do work over the telephone, who know networks in local markets, who are really sophisticated, who do wonderful jobs, who are excellent, and they have been painted as awful, bad actors because they do work on the telephone. Mm-hmm. And that's the one thing that stood out that's really bothered me for years. And I would tell you that they'll go through a quality enrollment for an hour and 10 minutes, and it's very easy to say, hey, you didn't say the plan's star rating on that call. We're going to mark you for not compliant. Hey, you said the TPMO disclaimer, but it was actually at the 6-minute mark of the phone call. Sorry, we got to write you up. I see that stuff and live and breathe it all the time. And I have field agents who get away with freaking murder, that are just awful. I know of field agents who have no right of even existing in the business, that do god-awful business, that are terrible. And every time that there's any sort of a compliance issue, it's just a finger pointing, he said, she said, and there's no evidential proof, and they get away with everything. Yeah. So I would just kind of say that I like some of this because I'm, again, trying to be very fair and balanced and pragmatic when I'm looking at the agent distribution and saying, I think we all need to have that from a context perspective, that there are very, very, very good phone agents. They're not all bad. And there's also some really good field agents that are just the best, that do free work. They're almost social workers. They're helping people with Part D plans. They're helping them get LIS. I know of agents that are taking their clients to pick up their meds and taking them to the senior clinic. We have phenomenal field agents doing that, but don't be so quick to call out the other side and tell them that they're all awful, because they do business in a different manner.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, as our dad would say.
They're not all bad, so quit painting it all with a broad stroke and being so divisive.
That's a great point, and that's gonna set up what I want to close with the proposed things in here. And just to list out a couple of the other things, obviously they're going to allow scopes of appointments to be collected at educational events again. They want to be able to use superlatives as long as they have some sort of backing. But as we've known for 15 years, it's very hard to describe a plan and not use any superlatives. And most agents don't even know that, where you can't say best or this is the best plan available. You have to say, this is the product I'd recommend for you, or based on, you have to finesse it, right?
If I were talking to my mother, this is the plan I'd put
exactly.
on.
But, a rational use of superlatives can be permitted. And then the big one was obviously scopes of appointment, the 48-hour scope of appointment going away, or proposed to be going away. And this has been the bane of a lot of agents' existence, as it's just a stupid, unnecessary stumbling block that we've lamented about for years. That was an old relic of the industry that got brought back and they basically question the wisdom of if and how it protects any consumers, and we know that it doesn't.
On the scope?
Yeah. And
I would add, I think the scope should be there to at least what it was supposed to do is narrow and define what you were going to talk about and sell or offer them. I think that makes sense. I am okay with the scope and saying, I'm here to talk to you about your health insurance and your health products and dental, or, you're selling them a hospital indemnity that fits with their health coverage that you're selling. That all makes sense. And it all got created because of financial advisors and annuity and, AUM people and people who were trying to get their foot in the door on Medicare and then come through the back door. And
they walked out with a bundle of $360 a month, and the consumer didn't know where Medicare stopped and where their financial product started.
Yeah, and they sold them a life policy while they were there. That's why it's there, and I'm okay with that. I think it should be there, but I think you just have to do it at the beginning of the presentation and define what you're going to discuss, and you're good.
So they basically said, it'll be as part of the presentation, scope the appointment in some way, right? You'll talk about exactly what Dan said, but let's be common sense about this, and it can be done at the time of the appointment when the beneficiary wants to discuss it on their schedule, right? So that's going to be a great positive change. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, actually before I finish, or kind of because it's a longer segment, the other thing that they talked about was an SEP for provider plan network changes. And this, I think, could be really good. It's going to be a good, but it also has the possibility to be a boondoggle and cause issues, right? I think if it's going to be very hard to arbitrate who and if and when providers are in network or out. And yes, it is going to legitimately help carriers be able to change and navigate that. And I'm optimistic about it if it's used properly. I want to caution agents, if this happens like we hope and think it's going to happen, don't abuse it, right? You're not going to write 30 plans during lock-in and every single one of them has the SEP of doctor, changer, and network. You're going to get termed. They're going to catch on to it. It's going to be hard for them to match up that, and it is going to be based on the beneficiary's attestation. So there's going to be the ability to do that, and I think that's really good. Go ahead.
There's another kind of very similar thing and what he's talking about is the ability for the plan and CMS to validate that there actually was that disruption is going to be challenging. And so I make the same example with like SPAP in the Medicare side, where SPAP, those pharmacy assistance plans, for those of you who know what they are, it's not like they don't talk, like that state with the SPAP doesn't talk to the federal government to actually validate it. So there are circumstances in which an agent will, write an SPAP application, and maybe they actually submit the app on behalf of the consumer to the state and they apply. Well, you don't know if that person actually qualified for that benefit, but it was almost like as long as you submit the application or you say that you did, you can write the enrollment and get the Medicare SEP and have the app go through because they don't talk to one another. And so we see that, and that's one of those areas that they're trying to crack down on as another compliance area. But we can just see like how DST got abused and how SPAP gets abused and ACC gets abused, that when they roll out with a good intention and saying, hey, this is a good win, because we've all been there, where, it's
completely valid.
There's contract negotiations between the carrier and a provider group, and they fall out of network, and that is highly, highly disruptive to a beneficiary. It really is. And it's good that they recognize that and they're giving the SEP, but I just worry that agents are going to abuse the crap out of it.
Yep. It is something, though, that I am highly excited about. And the reason why I'm hopeful about this SEP is I think that it will cut down on a lot of CTMs. And that's going to parlay into with the scope going away. What I found the most interesting, and I haven't heard a lot of other people talk about this, about the whole CMS call letter, was they basically have this whole segment in there where they pontificate about why they're even doing any of this in regards to call recordings and CTMs, and they're asking for the wisdom of recording the whole call or a portion of the call and asking for comments. And they basically stated in there that Medicare, and specifically Medicare Advantage, is an outlier in that it's the only product under Health and Human Services and CMS as regulatory authority that is treated this way.
Yep.
And we all know that, the thought is to protect vulnerable seniors, and I get that, but they're saying we have this whole ecosystem with fully recorded calls and all these statements and all these compliance and all these rules and all these boxes to check to be in compliance, and this is the only product, the only health insurance that you can represent that has all of these rules and regulations, and it's an outlier. And they question, we're not doing this with ACA. We're not doing
which is also a subsidized health insurance product.
Exactly. We're not doing this with employer group insurance. We're not doing this with short term. We're not doing this with any other type of health insurance in the whole ecosystem.
Nor do you even do that with a government FHA loan.
Correct.
Nor do you,
But yet on this Medicare Advantage and product, we have the most hyper-aggressive compliance. And they even hinted at the fact, and this is what I take away from it, if you look at the current ecosystem that exists with Medicare Advantage,
I'm glad you're talking about it,
and you think of all of the billions and probably tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars that our industry is spending right now on Medicare Advantage compliance and CTMs, I say it's this giant snake eating its own tail, and you have this entire system that has just evolved into the carriers. CTM comes in, they investigate it, it's founded, it's unfounded. They go on this witch hunt to talk about, did you check all these boxes? And we know that 90% of it.
And here's the thing. I'm on more of those calls than you are, but like I get on these calls with people in compliance and they cannot see the forest through the trees.
Exactly.
They do not even understand. It's like I had to sit on a call with 9 people from a compliance department, and 3 of these people just got a job however many months ago. They don't know their head from their ass. And these companies are spending all this money, and all they know is they're just going through and checking boxes. And there's not even like an understanding of why we're going through the exercise. And at the end of the day, when people call into Medicare and they make a CTM or complaint, why did they do it 90% of the time?
Because they had some issue with the doctor or the pharmacy or the carrier, and the agent on the phone says, in order for me to help you, I have to create a complaint. I have to create a CTM.
90% of the time, they just want to change their plan, because 90% of like the CMS CTMs and complaints and everything, it all reverts back to they're just having some friction point, whether it was valid, not valid, but a big chunk of all these CTMs are not even, I hate to use the word fair. What's another way I can even describe it? It's not even valid, right? A lot of these complaints that they're making, and they're straddling all these CTMs and creating this monstrous number and creating this cumbersome workload for these departments and the compliance people. Yep. And now, oh gosh, we got to have 9 people. Now we got to have 17 people.
That's what I'm talking about the snake eating its own tail. You create like, this problem.
And then it's bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's no different to where, you know, like I could go on and talk about like homelessness and the money we throw at it, and the problem keeps getting bigger the more we throw at it. And it's like, you know, when I sit here and just think about the wisdom of it, like we're talking about, and like imagine not having to spend 90% of our time on the things that are like really non-issues. Like, and if you could actually just spend the time and the resource on actual really bad things that are not compliant and clean those up, we would just all be better off.
And that's my point, that I think so many, when you talk about the whole industry not being able to see the forest from the trees, is that how it goes? The forest through the trees. Yeah. I look at it and go, we as an industry are spending billions and billions of dollars on this compliance in the Medicare Advantage ecosystem. And how better could we deploy those dollars and resources? Those could go for increased funding of the plans.
And by the way, that agent that you hate so bad, you compliance people, you have a job because they sold a plan and make revenue for your company.
Exactly. Well, and at least with the current ecosystem and the way it is, yes, every once in a while you're catching a bad agent who's a bad actor who should be termed out of the industry. But we have other mechanisms to catch those people. We have other mechanisms to get those people out of the industry. And we basically created an entire sub-industry that is wasteful in and of itself, that doesn't even yield the actual outcomes that we're trying to do. All it's just become is just the one big circle of compliance, of creating the issue of you don't want to, you start this problem and then you try to fix it. And then like Dan said, it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And if we just shifted the focus and reallocated those dollars, we could just shift them right into funding, and we could solve a lot of the other issues, because we're not wasting dollars on an entire quest to nowhere.
Yeah, like, gee, if only you could track data and results of people of certain NPNs and then catch trends, you could actually eliminate things rather than just tons of little one-offs and things that are very immaterial. You know, it's very frustrating. And just to kind of wrap that, I mean, I definitely just, you know, compliance is really important. It is. We always tell everybody it's important that you're a good agent. You have to act with integrity, with morality, do the right thing for the customer all the time. And, you know, when agents do that and they purport themselves as such, they do an excellent job. Compliance is important, but I think that what we've been talking about for a few minutes at least, we like to see them at least bring it up in the call letter, talking about the overall wisdom of it, because I would love, it's the one thing about the business that just needs a massive, massive overhaul. It needs to be hit the complete reset button and have different metrics and different focuses than what it has right now.
Yep. And ultimately, guys, that was my big takeaway from the proposed final rule, is I feel validated that a lot of the concerns and things that have been on our mind, at least the small, easy wins, are being heard. And I do think that, you know, we are, like we've been saying, set up for better days in 2027. I think that we're going to solve some of the funding things, maybe redeploy some of these dollars. I think funding dollars will flow back into the ecosystem. And Dan and I were joking this week that we're going to see some of the carriers, it's going to be like that South Park episode where they're like, we're sorry, you know, I'm sorry. And they go on the apology tour for having to make the hard changes that they had to, and try to ingratiate good business and practices back to the agents and distribution, and we can go back to trying to help grow and proliferate these plans across the Medicare ecosystem.
Yep. I'll have $1 in mine circled. So
yeah,
$1.
Exactly. So I think there are some good things happening, guys. It's good indicators. There's a couple other things that we'll have to talk about next time that I think, but it just put your head down, do a good job, raise the bar, raise your standards, and let's be able to maintain and grow over these next couple hard months.
And my last little thing to all of you listening who are agents and producing out there, we're seeing that the positivity, the bright spots, the call letter, some of these things that are going to maybe loosen and, give you a little bit of reprieve. But please, please, please don't forget that the carriers are going to operate under the current conditions. And so you need to stay vigilant over this next year while maybe scope of appointments are going to be alleviated. The cool down period between an educational and a sales event is going to be changed. The TPMO disclaimer is going to lighten up. Some of these proposed things, those are all great for 2027, but in the interim, until it's actually done, please make sure that you're still following the rules in the meantime. We don't want you to kind of
gold standard.
Yeah, don't get caught up in the crossfire in the meantime. All right.
Do the gold standard.
All righty.
Thanks, guys.